so grateful to introduce the speaker of today. So, Cornelia Daheim, welcome to the floor. I cannot really introduce you with words. We were talking that before because you couldn't really give me a definition, but I do believe you will do it yourself, and that I do know that your talk is going to be really inspirational for us from studio, but also for all of you. So give her a big hand of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot for the invitation also to both here who brought me here. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, maybe starting explaining who I am. I'm a futurist. And that usually brings about a lot of questions, so I try to explain myself. There's different kinds of futurists. There's those who still predict and say we know exactly what kind of future will there be, which are not. And there's others who try to, which is what I do, work with companies and institutions and say, okay, what could come? What is possible, and what kind of future do we want, and what do we have to do today to make that happen? And so this is what I do. I work with companies, large ones like BASF I've worked with, or Philips, or institutions. For example, at the moment I'm working on a project with the European Parliament, working with scenarios, trying to make the policymakers think in the long term, which is not in the system so far. They work as the companies do in the short-term systems mostly, by basically supporting companies and institutions who want to look beyond 3 years, beyond 4 years, whatever the usual sort of limit of how long ahead we look is. And that's what I do. I've been doing this for 15 years. I also have to confess to having a humanities background. I've just discussed postmodernism with one of the guests here. So I came into this job by chance. I'd learned it on the job. Today you can study this in Berlin, as you can in Hawaii, in Japan, in the US, in the UK, and in Finland a lot. So now there's proper ways to become a futurist. I still learned on the job. But okay, that's what I do. And I also have to confess to another thing, to be sort of on a mission today. I have a talk about inclusive futures, and I've been so brave to put up a vision for 2030. So I really have a push for where I think we personally should go. And I'm saying I have to confess to this because in Germany we once had a chancellor who said if you have a vision, you should go to hospital. So it's tough today to still say you have a vision. But I think actually this topic is one where we should still dare to do this. Yes, I got it. So that's illustrating sort of the main issue of why we actually need futurists and why we need to look a bit differently at the long term. Henry Ford once said, if I would have asked people what they wanted in the future, they would have said a faster horse. And that means that we usually think in the systems that we know. We extend those kind of things, product, solutions that we know. And we really struggle with thinking new stuff. We tend to extrapolate what is already there and say, could this become a little bit better? But we really struggle with thinking in alternatives, and that to do that is sort of the main task of looking at the future from this kind of futurism I come from, to think in alternatives. To not say we know exactly what is coming, but to say there's other alternatives, and it's about us making a choice and see, with all humble respect for what you can do in where you are and what you will represent in your organization or institution or your job. That's where we want to push. That's where we want to go. And that's the simple principle in very simplified terms. So, but why really think about inclusion, inclusive futures? Yes, it's a positive vision, but do we still need this? Or is this push towards inclusion, towards more diversity, is this not over? Is it not a 50s problem? You could say, from where you saw all these white, middle-aged men sitting around the table making the decisions. And clearly I have to say, unfortunately, when I started working and working with the strategy makers or the policy makers, I have to say I was shocked that no, it's still an issue. So unfortunately, you can more or less take this picture still. Apologies to the white middle-aged men here, not your personal fault. But you can still take this picture. And this sort of mainstream dominance of one kind of group, characterizing our thinking, characterizing many of our decisions, is still there. So we still need more diversity, and we've thought about it in lots of terms of gender. This is an old discussion, you know, you've had here, I think, also a lot. Or about racial issues. But I think there's more to it, and I would like to focus at two other groups today. And that's people with disabilities and the lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender community. As two groups who exemplify that we have made progress already towards inclusion, and that there is still more to come towards which we have to push. But why really this term inclusion, and what does it mean? And I apologize here for the German, but I think you can exchange here for a C, and then you are fine. This really exemplifies, shows, visualizes what this term inclusion really means. And it's a maybe much used term, but in fact it is about a revolution, and we forget this. We've been talking about getting more diversity in for a long time in terms of integration. And this here shows you on the left-hand side what is sort of exclusion. You have one big societal group that's on the inside, and you have others outside. And the principle of integration says, okay, we make some space. They can come in, but can they please come into our system? So society as such, it stays the same. While the principle of inclusion says, okay, we have to change. This all has to come inside, and they don't have to play by our rules, but we have to adapt in a way that there's no barriers for the others anymore. And it actually leads to a mix in the end. So we don't have these separate groups anymore. Again, it's a big vision, but it's a different principle that's saying you can be integrated into our system, but it says the system itself has to change so that it's possible, and so that the barriers are removed. And that is the new principle of inclusion that has really changed and is continuing to change Europe strongly, I think. And the aspect that has really pushed towards this change already, the strongest, you can say, trigger for this has been a UN resolution that I think is rarely known for some reason. That's why I'm advertising it here also strongly. And that has founded really a monumental change. It was came into force, I think, in 2008, open for signature. And on that date, it was the UN resolution in all of its history that on the same date had the most signatures. And it has been signed by a lot of countries by now, also in Europe by most, and ratified. And it is the first human rights treaty, also of our century. And it turned around how we think about inclusion of people with disabilities by saying, okay, this is not anymore about this principle of integration and support. So we should not think about people with disability anymore in terms of supporting and helping them. They are objects that have to be helped. They have a problem. But it was saying, okay, turn this around towards this principle of inclusion. We have to remove the barriers, and they are subjects. They have to decide themselves. They have to be included in the conversation, first of all. So not about us without us is a key principle from this area. And that means inclusion becomes a human right with this treaty. And all countries who have signed, they also have to report. So from this old principle of the social institutions in different countries doing what they think helps people with disabilities, how they have to be supported, Now you can say this is a human right and you can fight for it, and all nations have to report to the UN. So this, for all people fighting for a long time already, this has been a long movement of people with disabilities in nearly all European nations. This has been a revolutionary act, a really strong sign that this resolution was made and that so many countries signed it. There's, of course, still not the progress that we would need in the long term. That's why we still have to push. But this was really a strong act, and that's governing, I think, now also how we can push more for it. Because we have this framework, because we have the clarity that this is a human right, and that it's not about being supported and giving some charity to people who need it, but really about changing the society so that the barriers are removed and people can be in one inclusive society, whatever their disability is. Maybe to tell you also a bit how I came into this and how this is sort of this change in the thinking is signified in where I work in Germany. These are images from a big major German congress on the topic. It was the first national congress on inclusion and brought together people working in the field, but also people working on how cities are set up, people working on HR, people working on mobility solutions, and really thinking about the long term and the trends that are happening around this. And I supported this NGO that ran this conference, Minc in German, which is a lottery-based NGO in Germany, and who have pushed a lot for the topic. And it brought about a real, you could say, national push of all these institutions thinking about the long term and about how they can also affect change and not only react to legislatory change, react to cost cuts and so on, and think about the short term, but really think about the long term vision and make that happen. So how is this trend towards inclusion, which is being pushed by this resolution, affected by other trends? As futurists, we look at trends a lot, so I've brought an overview of mega trends, and I will not show all, don't be afraid. This will not go on for an hour, but I will look at some which clearly interact with this topic and which I try to argue push it forward and can create synergy if we take it well. And the first is boring old demographic change. We have all heard so much, and we all think, yeah, everybody knows and so on, but the fact is we haven't yet implemented the actions we need to take. And it's very clear if you look at the topic of disability, because we have many more aging people, and the share of people with a disability is just simply much, much higher the older you get. So it's a simple mathematics of how these two topics interact. This is an example from Germany, and that's the share of people with a severe disability in the older. And you can see it's about 50%. As far as I know, it's more or less the same in other European countries, basically demonstrating that most disabilities are also acquired. Most disabilities are acquired over the lifetime, so get prepared. 20% of us gonna get hit at a certain point. It's not something that just happens to somebody because they have a birth defect. And if we take this together with, again, the simple mathematics of the expected population development, these are different population groups, the younger at the bottom, the older at the top. And you can see how this changes from 2015 today to 2060 here at the end. So the share of the older, this is Europe overall, and in some countries much faster, for example in Germany, this share just grows. And with it goes the share of people with acquired disability. So there's also a point of just having to say we have to prepare. No way around it. It's going to be more people. And also this lobby, this group of people fighting for their rights is going to get stronger. The same also is true of more people being labeled as having a disability for those disabilities which are not acquired. This is a UK example, people with learning disabilities in 3 scenarios, so they vary some assumptions. But you can see that in all expectations they have, the share of people with a learning disability goes up. The main driver here, the study says, is also about acceptance. So there's also a fact around that there's not so much stigma anymore to say there is a learning disability, a learning problem. And there's also effects around how things are labeled. People do go nowadays to psychologists who didn't go 30 years ago, and so on. So these effects also happen. But effect is more people also with these kinds of disabilities. And other trends also play into how this turns out in the next 20 years. One of them is this big topic of a new generation taking over. In 10 years' time, the majority of the people in the workforce are going to be millennials, digital natives. And they just simply have different values, not only different communication styles, as shown here, but different values. They challenge also the traditional career orientation. They want more meaning in work. And they have a completely different attitude towards diversity. A much more open, inclusive, you can say. I've brought one number with me, which says that of the people who are today 60 years and older, of them 7% say I'm not 100% heterosexual. Of the younger 18 to 24-year-olds, it's 50% nearly. So, okay, that is a massive difference. And this group will take over. And I push for this group to come on, go for it. You can make that difference. You can make that change now. And this is supported by a couple of other trends in work development. We have a big discussion around at the moment about how work is changing. So this debate around how much work do we have and so on, I don't want to go into at the moment. But what we can safely say is, okay, in the last 10, 20 years, we have seen that how work is organized has changed a lot due to technology. In a project of mine, a customer has once said that work, due to technological change, knowledge work at least, is now freed from the tyranny of the office desk. So your knowledge work you can basically take anywhere. It's free in terms of time and space where you do it. At least theoretically, depending on what you negotiate with your employer and so on. But this is happening. And for the people with a disability, those who are unemployed looking for a job, a quarter of them say mobility issues, the problem of not having functional transport to get where they would need to go to work, is a major problem in getting a job. So, okay, we can of course not use this as an excuse to say we do not have to make the workspaces more inclusive. This we have to do. But still, this flexibilization can play into making work more inclusive for all, in the positive sense, saying, okay, in 10, 20 years' time, we will in any case work in a kind of metaverse, some call it, so a connected space that's in the Internet of Things, and that's connected, that maybe we carry around with us, and that can be in different locations, and that can help a lot for people who have problems with mobility. It's pushed also by the trend from technology towards driverless cars. It's pushed by new intermodal solutions. It doesn't have to be this fancy driverless car, but you could say, okay, it's a driverless bus whom you can call on your app when you need it. And yes, it's accessible by everybody in a wheelchair, by everybody who has a specific need and cannot get into how the normal cars are built. So if we turn this around, this system change at the moment that we have in technology, and make it accessible for everybody, it's actually a game changer, I think, for inclusion. So it's clear from my perspective that technology can become an enabler. Digitalization can become an enabler of more inclusion in the positive sense. And that doesn't mean only the help technologies that are around, but it can also mean more. It can use also the possibilities that we have when we tap into the crowd by digitalization. This is one example. It's an app that's called Lend Your Eyes, Be My Eyes. And you can register, so you can do it right away. Yeah. And with this app, you can register and say, okay, if I have time, I'm happy to help somebody who has a difficulty in seeing something, reading something. So it could be somebody who is blind or has a seeing impairment and who's alone at home and trying to figure out how to plug in some new device they bought and they cannot read what's on the manual or whatever. So somebody who just needs a bit of help and who doesn't have a full-time day support, doesn't need it actually, but can, with this kind of support, it just connects people who are willing to help, do it in small bites, do it when they are around, and really maps it together with demand and supply. Really provides new support possibilities and taps into this platform solution in a positive way here. And another example showing us what digitalization can also do is this example from Germany, that's being rolled out now in Europe. It's called RealMap. I don't know if you haven't used RealMap, okay. Spread the word. RealMap is again crowd-based, app-based map. That maps has started in Berlin, where you can get into with a wheelchair or walking impairment. And it just basically gets everybody the app. And if you are there, you can provide the information. So the more users are into it, the more information you have. And again, it doesn't need a lot of funding. It's now being rolled out in Europe because they basically have the technology there. It just depends on the crowd really bringing it in together and is enabled by the fact that we have these technologies now, that we are connected all the time. And it's thereby providing completely new possibilities. There's the same principle also for dysfunctional staircases and elevators in German train stations. I don't know if you have that problem here, but we have a big problem with dysfunctional elevators in German train stations, which is a complete nuisance for anybody in a wheelchair. Because you go there, you think you can take the S-Bahn, the tram, whatever, but it's just not working. And it uses the same principle. You can just put a quick mark in there, and before you leave the house, you can check, okay, this is not working, I have to go to the next one. But you have not made your way into the station and so on. Then, again, as the 20th person that day, standing in front of that broken elevator and so on. So, with these kinds of technologies, we just have more options. And we can tap into the crowd for something that benefits all. And without going into that much detail, I would like to argue that we have also seen a very, very positive development in terms of the LGBT community, the community of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. And to quote one funny trend, one funny signal maybe, you will not believe it, but the Eurovision Song Contest actually had a strong role here. They had now 3 official LGBT contestants and 2 winners. And in Austria, actually Conchita Wurst has been a complete phenomenon and the most Googled, more than ABBA, in the year 2016. And these kind of media phenomena just opened the door for complete debate that I remember I tried to have 8 years ago or so on, with my customers, so going into strategy rounds in big companies, working with HR people there, and then bringing up the topic of transgender or something was 8 years ago, 10 years ago. It was impossible. But after the Eurovision Song Contest with Conchita was winning, it was possible. They had an idea. They had had a conversation about it with their friends and so on. So this was a door opener clearly in the public perception. And there's many more examples of how this community has in the last years become much more visible, you could say. I'm not saying there are no problems anymore, not at all, but just saying it has become more visible. There are science and technology festivals for the tribe, and also in business it has become much more prominent. It has its own career fair in Germany now, Sticks and Stones, which targets specifically this group, but also everybody who does not feel like the average person who wants to go to a corporate career fair that is by the old rules, so to speak. Unicorns, that's the term. And we have official creation of the 100 leading executives who are out as LGBT. I've brought the example from the last one, which is from Lloyd's of London, a very traditional company you might know, and there's lots of them, and I've calculated, and the share of Europeans is disproportionately high if you look at this list and the previous ones. So I would say we have also a bit of a responsibility to push forward this kind of movement more and keep that standard up, even go beyond. And yes, there's not only these examples from technologies, there's not only these examples from the career phase, space and so on, but there's also a strong political movement towards this. So we are in a framework of UN strategies that are rolled out. There's a European City Access Award. There's a European strategy for people with disabilities being rolled out. There's UN initiatives for accessible cities. So there's a push. There's also programs where one can apply for funding. Yeah? And the whole topic around city development is very big and might even, I think, be interesting specifically for you here. So it becomes visible that this topic needs to be tackled in conjunction with these technology developments that we are talking so much about at the moment. And that's sort of, I would say, the big but at the end. So I've made a point. We have gained traction, is the point, basically. We have this UN resolution. We have many national programs. We have made progress. We have visibility. We have this paradigm shift that we have seen. And we have positive developments from several trends that push this development forward. One is the clear demographic facts around it. One is the value change of the younger generation. And a lot is around the technology opportunities which are there. But unfortunately, at the end, there's still this but, which is the fact that if we don't take care at the moment, these technology developments, which is a space I think many of you are also working in, they might replicate old prejudice, old exclusion principles, you could say. To quote one sort of signal around this, is just these discussions we have seen in the media in the last weeks around how technology repeats or even furthers prejudice. There's one example around Google Photos, which cannot really, see and attribute people with a black color properly. They are labeled as gorillas. So there's more. There's racist algorithms which are being questioned at the moment. There's questions about who gets which ads for what kinds of jobs, according to their gender, according to their sexual orientation, and so on. And this has gone through a lot of, we could say, debate at the moment, but we are seeing we don't have the lever at the moment. The algorithms are taking over, you could say, in many fields. These new technologies are creating new systems which create access or deny it. And that means that in this push towards new technologies, we need to really take care that these are inclusive. Inclusive digitalization is, I think, a key lever for not creating now a new level of systems, which again excludes. So that really pushes, if I may, all of you who work in technology, to take this into account, to look at this, to get these groups in, to have a double check what is being done there, and to make sure these technologies actually, and these new systems we are creating at the moment, do the opposite, that they include. And that's sort of the old push towards universal design, design for all, and that kind of perspective. So that was the one but. However, in conclusion, I think it is still a fact that at the moment we are in a situation, there are still many problems. You can paint many dark scenarios. We have political insecurity, we have refugee crisis, and so on and so on. But we have made extreme progress. Nobody knows about this resolution somehow. But for those with the disability, this has been a real changer. And we are at the moment where we are creating new systems. So with all these new technologies we are building, with how we are reorganizing cities, how we are rebuilding these smart cities, we can do this, and the same counts true for work, where we are reinventing work at the moment, where we are reinventing how we cooperate, where we work, when, with whom, with what kind of underlying technology. This, I think, is a moment where we can, if we all push together and have consciously not made the point of the economic benefit, that this pays out in the end, and so on. Because I think it's not the point. Others can do it, it's right, you can do it, you can put a number onto it, and yes, it comes out positively economically also. But it's a value choice. It's a value choice we're making, and this inclusive societies, I think, if you ask most people, something actually everybody agrees on. It's actually what people want. It's how we want to live. And we can do this now. And that's sort of the meaning of this talk. And I would like to invite you to push in your own work for this. I hope you push with me towards this, and I think we have the opportunities and the means here in Europe to do this. And with this, I would like to close a last quotation, German philosopher, loosely quoting, saying that sometimes the visions of the afternoon are the realities of the next morning. So good luck with this, and I'm here for questions.